On our channel, we visited many times places that had a rampant economy during the times of the Soviet Union, but then fell into disgrace after the collapse of said Soviet Union due to poor management, but more often than not due to the fact that the industry that these cities were based on had no more reason to exist after the collapse of the Soviet Union. And today, here in Arctic Russia, we're gonna continue the trend. Not long ago, I had 2 weeks off from work and I wasn't quite sure where to spend my holidays. I wasn't quite sure whether to go spend my holidays in Paris, the city of love, or the amazing streets of Stockholm, or maybe the splendid beaches of legendary Kyrgyzstan. But then, I had a friend of a friend of a friend who reached out to me on Instagram asking me if I wanted to join them on their adventure to a small Russian town that was closer to the North Pole than it was to the capital Moscow, and that was a contendant for the title of creepiest town in the country. It was a town that was founded in Soviet times so that the Soviets could take advantage of the huge deposits of coal that had been discovered in the Arctic. Later, in the 90s, the coal industry met its natural decline, and with it, the population of the town that I was invited to. I then decided to obviously join this friend of a friend of a friend just because I was promised that we would find what we like most. Lots of huge and depressing abandoned Soviet buildings. The location from where I'm filming the beginning of this video is undisclosed, but I can easily disclose what is going to be the ultimate goal for this video, which is going to be reaching the town of Vorgasho, well above the Arctic Circle, and a town that has got a very interesting history. Все, готовы? Пойдем!
Buongiorno.
Михаил, buongiorno. А что, Lada Zhiguli закончили? Не были Lada Zhiguli? Going on an adventure on a Lada Zhiguli would have made the whole thing extremely poetic, but it wouldn't have been the right car for the job. On that day, I would have trusted my life in the hands of 3 random Russians: Philip, Denis, and Slava, the driver, who had hopefully rented the right type of vehicle to take out to on the roads typical of the lands above the 67th parallel. We have now left the city grounds of the town that we were just in, meaning that now we're pretty much in the middle of nowhere. We're starting to cross the coal mines that were pretty much the reason why the town of Vorgasho was founded in the early 1960s, just so that the Soviet Union could take advantage of the huge deposits of coal that were discovered here in the Arctic circles. This is what the road looks like. Obviously everything is frosty and snowy and stupidly cold, and we've got roughly half an hour of driving before we will be able to set our eyes on what is probably the scariest town in the whole of Russia, Vorgasho. The type of terrain that we were going to traverse on our way to Vorgasho was the tundra, coinciding with that part of the world that is so up north that trees don't even grow. It is so inhospitable that this region was pretty much untouched by civilization for many centuries, up until the 20th one, when the Soviet Union decided to send a few 100,000 people up here to populate the gulags of the area, in hope that its prisoners would take part in fun activities such as mining some of the many resources of the Arctic.
В 40-е годы очень много денег сошло. И денег, и ресурсов, и людей. Под каждую шахту, видишь, строили город отдельный.
Мне самого интересно думать, что Vorgasho вообще устроили в 64 году. Значит, ему даже что, 60 лет. И он уже умер. Так молодой городок, да? This was the context in which Vorgasho was founded, and even though it is the settlement that has suffered the largest population collapse, going from a population peak of around 20,000 in 1989 to the 2,000 of today, it is not the only outpost in the area. On our way to Varga Shore, we would have found other examples of the notorious concept of Soviet monotowns. Towns that were built from scratch in 20th century to serve a single industry that would create jobs for the whole population of that settlement. And this industry here in the Arctic was indeed the coal industry, whose decline would then lead many of our dear viewers to become extremely familiar with the Russian word Zabroshka, which is the term that Russians use to indicate an abandoned Soviet building of any kind that is free for anyone to explore. So we have now entered the only populated center that is found between the town that we started this video from and our final destination, which is Varga Shore. And let me tell you, this place is probably just as creepy as Varga Shore is going to be, because again, all of the populated centers near this area basically have suffered the same fate. Look at it. That's a random Zabroshka, which is not so random because almost every single building that we see left and right is a complete Zabroshka. It's fully abandoned basically. We're now in the village of Severney, which, if you remember, we have visited before in our young life. Oh, there's another vehicle coming from the opposite direction. You don't see many of these very often at these latitudes, just because of the sheer amount of people who have left, who have abandoned their homes in places such as Varga Shore. And the town of Varga Shore is the one that we can actually see right now, because we're pretty much entering the outskirts of Varga Shore. If a town by the size of Varga Shore can even have something that can be defined as outskirts, really. We can see some smoke coming from the chimneys of the factories that are still operating here in Varga Shore, and it's going to be very interesting to see if we can enter some of the abandoned commie blocks, and surely we will have to pay a visit to the omnipresent statue of Lenin that surely was installed here in Varga Shore back when the town was founded, and is still here for everybody to see. As we approached the entrance to Varga Shore, Slava took out his drone to take some footage of what is not only the creepiest town in Russia, but also probably the town with the harshest living conditions, considering that temperatures in winter can go as low as minus 50 degrees Celsius, and in summer they rarely go above 15. Varga Shore is located at the very north of the Komi Republic, a federal subject of Russia that, before being heavily Russified at the times of the Soviet Union, was a place that was, for the most part, inhabited by the indigenous Komi people, which had and still have their own culture and language. We have now made it to the entrance of the town of Varga Shore. You can see the classic Soviet stele. It's a real pity that we can't get any closer, really, just because of the amount of snow that we have. I mean, I've got boots, but haven't got the best footwear for this kind of terrain, so to speak. You can see that the atmosphere here is getting quite creepy already, just because you can see this Soviet stele that was installed back during the year of the foundation of Varga Shore. And then on the background you can already see some of the abandoned, grey, depressing commie blocks that we're going to find all over town basically. Что ты сказал, что значит Varga Shore?
По одной версии ручей оленьей тропы, по другой получается устье иссохшей реки.
And you can see another advantage of riding with some random Russian guys here in the Russian north is that we can get some information about the etymology of places such as Varga Shore, which is obviously a commie word. Slav, спасибо, что ты приглашал. Krasavchik. And thanks indeed to my Russian friends, because we just got to a place that was pretty much founded in the name of communism. All the people that were taken from all over Russia and transferred here so far north, they were moved here for the sake of communist ideology, because all the coal that people would get up every day in order to mine was then going to be used to meet the industrial and economical needs of the Soviet Union, of the motherland. And there are two things here at the beginning of Varga Shore that I want to show you that are pretty much symbols of what was the communist ideology of the Soviet Union. You've got the Dom Kultury, the House of Culture, which I have to say I'm quite surprised to see that it's actually open to the public, because you've got a couple of rooms that are actually lit. And then you've got the statue of Vladimir Lenin. Man, we're now driving on one of the craziest roads that I've ever traveled on, because you've got semi-abandoned commie blocks to the left, semi-abandoned commie blocks to the right. This one is, I would say that it's almost fully abandoned, but I can still see a couple of rooms with the light on. And this is Vorga Shore for you. And just because this is permafrost, this is actually interesting. You can see that most of these houses are actually standing on these pillars right here, because if they were to build houses in the way they usually do, the basements and the foundations of these houses would pretty much melt the permafrost beneath, causing all sorts of complications, really. This town, I mean, it was supposed to be pretty big in terms of population. It's not that big in terms of size, so much that we were just driving through it for 5 minutes and we've already reached the end of it, as you can see. So we will now have to go back, and maybe we'll be able to find some 5-story building that we can actually go and explore. All the buildings here have got no more and no less than 5 floors.
Будешь квартиру покупать в Аргашоре?
Ну, если документы можно быстро сделать, почему нет? Сколько стоит, по-твоему? Наверное, мне дадут деньги, чтобы я покупал почти.
Да, потому что коммуналка дорогая очень.
Сколько будет?
Я не знаю, но предполагаю, что 5-10 рублей в месяц.
А, это потому что если зато один человек еще живет в целый дом, они не могут выключать электричество и отопление для целого дома. Это так?
Да. Центральное отопление, да.
Okay, we have now settled on one of the apartment blocks here in Varga Shore that we want to go up and explore, basically. So we have picked this one because it looks like that people are not really living on this side of the building, even though there are some rooms that are well lit, especially over there. So as I was talking to Slava, you can actually buy some of these apartments for sale, even though it's not going to be the smartest business decision ever, because you have to still pay for kommunalki. You have to think that on the sections of this apartment complex where people are still living, if there is at least one person that is still inhabiting their apartment, that means that the local administration of Vorga Shore is not allowed to turn the heating and the electricity off. So even those apartments that have been abandoned for decades, they still have their heating and electricity on, because all of that stuff in Russia, and even more so in Arctic Russia, is centralized. So that's how it goes. А если я хочу снимать квартиру, сколько оплатил для аренды твой друг?
Он здесь оплатил, по-моему, вообще за 5000 в месяц.
So judging by the amount of snow, it looks like people are not really living on this section of the building, so we should be safe to explore. Oh, just promise me that you're not going to do this at home, guys. Oh my god, everything is so creepy and it looks like everything could fall apart any moment, basically. This is... А что это такое? Юность? Это советский магазин? 1982. Oh my god, этот магазин от коммунистических времен 1982 года. This is one of the Soviet magazines that used to be published probably, I don't know, maybe once a month? Каждый месяц выпускали, да?
Как будто да. 12 месяцев.
О, можешь до декабря. И там кто была? Брежнев, по-моему. Можешь открыть еще раз? You can actually see that on some of these pages of this Soviet magazine, you can see some of the faces of the secretaries of the Soviet Union that used to pretty much run the entire country at the times when Varga Shore used to be a place that was thriving economically, basically. And you see another guy right here, obviously, Leonid Ilyich Brezhnev. Пиздец! А почему ты думаешь, что здесь электричества нету? Вообще в здании здесь люди не живут?
Вот в этом подъезде нет, в соседнем живут.
Значит, на другом подъезде электричество будет.
Скорее всего, да.
I think we might have just got to the saddest room of them all. I'm fairly sure that this room used to belong to one of the kids of this family just because of the amount of toys and puppies that we can see on the floor. So I'm not quite sure whether this was a piano and pretty much people stole all the white and black thingies, or if this actually is a separate musical instrument that I'm not quite familiar with. But at least the chords are still here, so we can actually play some sad music that can actually give us a sense of some creepy atmosphere. Да, ну я считаю, что фортепиано там, блин, вообще эмоции. Да. Эмоции были. И они, наверное, учились здесь, в Варгашоре, была школьная музыкальная, наверное, не знаю. Это все я представляю. И у меня есть такая картинка в голове. Я сейчас вижу, как Варгашор выглядит сейчас. Мне просто интересно подумать о контрасте с прошлым.
Чувствуешь себя археологом каким-то, да, таким?
Я считаю себя археолог советского декадентизма. And this is basically how the people of the north live here in Vorgasho. It's actually interesting that there is at least one bank here in Vorgasho, Sberbank, and also over there I saw a biblioteca, a library for the people of this town. And as you guys can see, it's getting darker because the sun is about to set, or maybe it has set already and this is twilight. After all, it's already 11:30 a.m. And by the way, I'm obviously by myself now because I got detached from our group of Russians, Slava, Denis and Philip, because I still wanted to go for a walk around. Apparently they were very cold, so they wanted to stay inside the car. And I was like, I'm not cold, and I'm the Italian one. But I wanted to see with my own eyes this monument, which is quite interesting to look at. It's got a very postmodernist style, as you can see, with this column holding a cube right on the main roundabout. Здравствуйте. Of the town. This monument was definitely one of the most amazing postmodernist monuments in the history of amazing postmodernist monuments. So much that I even took a picture of it to upload it to my Instagram. Just when I was walking by very slowly to admire this piece of art, I was approached by a babushka who seemed to be quite annoyed at the sight of a foreigner like me coming to pay a visit to their hometown. Я приехал, я люблю русский север. Нет, нет вообще. Не, почему вы так думаете?
Почему лезете все в нашу жизнь, я не понимаю.
Я искренне вам говорю. Apparently, the situation is such so that in the last few years, a lot of Russian bloggers have come to Vargashore to show the allegedly poor living conditions of the people who are still living in the town. And it seemed like some of the people from Vargashore, the Vargashorians, might have not liked that. But I know my way with babushkas, and I made her understand that I was legit, and my visit to Vargashore was solely due to my genuine interest for the romantic landscapes of the Arctic and my big passion for areas of the world that are the most different from the one that I grew up in.
Блогеры, кто приезжают,
Кто? Русские?
да,
Что делают?
показывают разруху.
Я понимаю ваши переживания, но я не так. Я не так говорю. Я даже говорил про памятники.
Мы же здесь живем, нам наш город нравится, нам тут все нравится.
Ну мне тоже нравится одеваться здесь.
Да?
Only then the babushka mellowed down and ended up being very nice to me. She even wished me a very good day.
Ладно, счастливо вам.
Ну, вам тоже приятно было говорить. And I told the boys that I would meet them at the only cafe in town, which I really hope that is right next to the only shop in town, which is that Magnet over there, which is a Russian chain of supermarkets. It's also next to the only pharmacy in town, and I'm really hoping that I'm going to find the cafe over there. It was a huge honor for me to become the first ever Italian to set foot in the legendary cafe of the just as legendary town of Varga Shore. Considering the remote location of the town, the offering was quite good, with lots of different options on the menu.
Тут точно рабочая схема. Вот гамбургер, он съедобный, вкусный.
Не знаю, о.
Сейчас я вам гамбургер принесу.
О, не спешите. Большой капучино. Спасибо вам большое. Oh, спасибо вам большое. So I joined the boys back here at the only restaurant in the town of Vargasho, which is not only a restaurant, but it doubles as a shop where you can buy flowers. How cool is that? And I was recommended to try the local hamburger, as you can read here, if you know Cyrillic, Gamburger, because the H in English always translates to G in Russian. For example, hamburger is Gamburger, Harry Potter is Gary Potter, and Hitler, for example, is Gitler. And with my hamburger, I've also got a very nice cappuccino, and I was also just brought the hamburger that I was just talking about, inside a plastic bag. I'm not quite sure what I should think. Out of all the burgers that I've ever eaten in my life, this was definitely one of them. It was whelming. Very whelming. So whelming, in fact, that I couldn't even bring myself to finish it all, and I left half of it inside the plastic bag that the burger had been brought inside of. And then I decided to leave the place right away in order to avoid any embarrassment. Можно мне оплатить свою заказу, пожалуйста? Можно по карте? Нет, только перевод тогда наличными. Сколько еще раз?
390, пожалуйста.
Спасибо. Спасибо, до свидания. Well, we had a really nice halfa burger. I couldn't really eat anything more than that at the restaurant, at the only restaurant here in Vargasho. And we've just come back out on the street. We've got our car here, so we're ready to go back out on our Renault once again. And I have to say, at this time of the day, this place looks even creepier than it was a few minutes ago, just because you can see that it's almost nightfall, basically. It's 1:30 p.m. I could have spent hours, days, weeks strolling around the deserted streets of Vargasho, looking at these prefabricated residential blocks, some of which were really scary and looked like they could collapse any moment. At the very least, in Vargasho, safety does not seem to be that much of a problem.
Есть такие места на планете, где можно машину не закрывать, оставлять ключи и не ограбят. Ну, я бы нигде в России так не стал, но
Да?
мне этот сказал, кто машину сдавал. Понимаете, типа не угонят. Ну, во-первых, тут машины не воруют. Почему? Потому что тут дороги отсюда нету в Воркуте. Никуда.
Ну да, правильно.
То есть, по сути, мы на острове находимся, да? Ну, во-вторых, тут народ такой, тут не ворюги.
So you see, the climate is not the only thing that Vargasho has in common with places like Iceland or Itokortormit in Greenland, just to name two places that I've dreamt of visiting for the longest time. Well, once you start walking around Vargasho in the darkness, you can actually see even more of that visual effect of the very small number of apartments which are still inhabited in the apartment complexes around this town, basically. So even on this side, you can actually see that you've got a couple of apartments which are currently lit on the last floor, and then you've got another one on the penultimate floor, and so on and so forth until you reach the ground floor. These two right here are probably the apartment complexes here in the center of this town that are the most inhabited. There are not as many abandoned flats and apartments as there were in some of the other buildings that we saw earlier on in the day. And you can see that there is still... Oh, извини. You can see that there is still life here, at least in the center, because they're still installing a Christmas tree, as you can see. And you won't believe this, right behind me there are two kids that are currently playing on this slide that is made of ice. And I'm actually thinking that we might go for a ride as well. Не можно?
Да.
О, спасибо. Как лучше, на ногами или на спину?
На спину.
На спину лучше? Ну, попробую. Ву! Ву! Было круто, спасибо! Days in winter at these latitudes can be very short, and that is why we soon decided to bring our mission to a close. Successfully, I would say, considering that Vargas Shore was a place that I had wanted to visit since I was a very small kid. We did try and continue our exploration of the gravel paths and the ice roads of the tundra, but we did soon realize that we had better go back to civilization in order not to overdose on post-Soviet decadentism. The Arctic, due to its location at the edge of the Atlas, is a region of the world that excites us all geographic nerds, and we hope to soon be able to visit other amazing destinations such as Norilsk, Chukotka, Alaska, and Nunavut on the other side of the Bering Strait. In the meanwhile, cheers, thank you, bye!